Hey everybody, I'm Jack with Future Pastimes, a designer on Dune game themes and expansions, and this is Battle Language. We're having a roundtable discussion on a topic related to Dune, and I'm joined with by three guests here. We have GJ, Jaded, and Fat Buddha, and they're all playtesters on some of the other Future Pastime stuff that we have done and may still be doing. And our topic today is bidding strategies in Dune. And we've loaded up a few relevant factions into Tabletop Simulator that we can use as player aids. But we are going to talk about just general strategies in bidding that will work for just about any faction most of the time. Get some insights into what these players who play a lot of Dune and win quite often, so they clearly have some kind of idea of what should be done. And then we'll talk about the factions that have a lot more specific interaction with bidding and see how playing as or against those factions might change your strategies or what new strategies will emerge. So let's start. We are talking in general, and let me start by asking if player count has much of an impact on what your strategy might be. There, if you're at a lower than six players, then there's going to be fewer cards sold each turn. And so, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's more important to be getting cards early since fewer cards are going to be sold each turn if you're playing, let's say, 4P to start off with?
I feel it depends a lot on who you're playing, but in general, the lower the player count, the slightly lower the price will be, since there are the more players there are that can buy a card, maybe one can afford to pay a little extra to ensure themselves one single card that otherwise they may not get. At least that was my experience in my many four-player games. I personally don't really change how I bid depending on player count. I do change a lot depending on who is playing. So, and player count is involved in that because the fewer the players, the fewer the possible factions there are, and possible faction combinations that may change how I approach every single card. But in general, my objective, at least for turn one, if I can afford a card, like if I'm not Tleilaxu or Fremen or even Guild to some extent, if I know that maybe a one card I can get relatively safely, I tend to try as much as I can because that one single card will literally double my military potential. Or if I get a wordless card, the other people don't know, most of them at least. So there's always that extra inherent threat of, well, he has two cards now. Now, what he's going to do? If he ships onto me, he can kill him, my leader, and make him survive his own. So there's a lot of extra potential, like threatening force or whatever you want to call it, that just by buying one single extra card. And if you can spare that, like 5 or even 6 spice on turn one, I say it's a good start. It's a good way to put your foot on the ground and say, well, now I'm in the game. Now I can actually do things.
I think it's tough to speculate how player count directly affects the price of cards since, same number of players and same number of cards sold. That doesn't change, it's just the numbers. But one thing that definitely affects it indirectly is that less players means less battles and less chance of being in a battle. If you're at only 4 players, for example, you have 2 spice blows and maybe 2 people going for a stronghold, then there's still 3 strongholds open that aren't being contested at all. So less players, you probably could get away with not buying a card on the first turn if you got
Mhm.
something good in your initial deal.
Yeah, I think a big part of all the phases, but this one as well is just the constant bluffing, right? You start with a cheap hero or a worthless card, you bluff as if you have something better,
Mhm.
and depending on your faction, your bluff can be just a little stronger just by the nature of that faction, right? With like if you're Hark, you just have an extra card, so even if they're both pretty bad, it's the threat of the traders and everything that just makes it better. So if you are able to snatch an extra card. It's usually worth it just because of the bluff potential.
Yeah, I think whatever your starting card is going to have a big impact on that first bidding phase. And it can work either way. So if your first card is a worthless card, you're probably willing to spend more to ensure that you get a card. If the bidding goes up, you're maybe going to be more inclined to go, all right, I'll bid 5. And if I've got 10 spice, all right, maybe I will bid 6 because I don't want to be sitting here in Arakeen with 10 forces and all I've got is a Balisette. But conversely, if you've got, all right, I've got a projectile weapon as my first card, then I might be even more inclined to see if I can't pick up a defense as well. And so now I'm really well suited to get into some battles that might influence whether or not I go after a spice blow, whether or not I go for a turn 1 win attempt, depending on storm order and placement. So I think even at a lower player count, those are the things that motivate me. If I've got a truth trance or I've got weather control or a Hajer maybe, it's certainly not a preferred card. It's not a weapon or defense, which I think for just about everybody is at the top of the list of what you want to start off with. But I don't feel quite as desperate. I'm going to try to get one card, but I certainly am not going to be pushing to get 2, even if I have 10 spice to start off with. I think that's going to be different for the Emperor. The Emperor, if you're not trying to get at least 2 cards in the bidding phase, then what are you doing? Because you're probably going to still have plenty to ship with, and you're just going into Habanya Siege anyway by yourself with a bunch of Sardaukar and other guys, so don't need to worry about fighting on that first turn. You're just preventing anybody else from getting into that stronghold. But I agree. I don't know that necessarily the fewer cards means anything. I think the mix of factions and to some extent the specific players, if you're playing with somebody that has a play style or has a preferred moves, like I know what Greg Alaka is going to do on his first turn, so I can plan for that pretty consistently, and so it's the other players that I'm maybe a little bit more wary of. And storm order is always going to be a big factor, and it's a lot of stuff that people don't necessarily think about until it gets to shipping and movement. But I'm looking at it in the storm phase. Once that storm moves, I'm thinking about, all right, who can go for the win? Who's going to be responsible for trying to stop them? If I get to go early, can I just go for spice and leave the responsibility of stopping the Harkonnen or the Ixians or whoever from trying to go after a win, which means I'm even more likely to be safe at the spice blow. Those factors I'm thinking about even before we get to the bidding round, because then I can feel like, all right, maybe I save my money for shipment, or especially if I'm one of those factions that doesn't start with a lot of spice. So if I'm the Tleilaxu or if I'm the Guild or even the Bene Gesserit, they don't have a lot of spice, and it's harder for them to compete for cards with the Emperor and the Harkonnen and even the Atreides, who will try to game the system as best they can. So what other sort of general strategies, what are things that you think about, what will make you bid more or bid less, or affect how much spice you are willing to spend out of your whole supply, and not just at the start, but throughout the game? Are there any other factors or things that come up that you consistently go to, or your instinct is to follow that approach?
My number one rule is to never go broke during bidding. Because yes, cards win you fights, but if you don't have anyone on the board, you will not win the game. So cards are really useful, but you should always have some spice in the shipping and movement phase, or even the battle phase, to just ensure that you have the opportunity. Even if you don't end up doing it, at least you have the chance to actually get in there, actually ship somewhere, maybe gather some spice, fight someone, kill a leader. But if you spend everything during bidding, you lock yourself out of the entire turn, effectively. You're just a mere spectator, and you're at complete mercy of everyone else.
Yeah,
Yeah,
even
even if
even
you're like a
having one
turn one
spice.
Harkonnen, where you have like 10
Yeah,
forces on the board already, save at least one, just so you can do a sneaky shipment if you need it, or grab Thopters if you don't have them.
I cannot overstate how important it is to just keep some flexibility. Like, bidding is so early in the turn. The Storm phase, Spice Blow, and Chom go so quickly. The bidding is a really meaty one at the very beginning of the turn, and if you go all in over there, you will not do anything else for the next 45, 60 minutes. And it's such a risky play that if you're already down, you should always try to limit your losses even more. And like going full on, I want that card, I'm going to pay whatever it needs to be paid, it's generally not worth it. I hardly ever, I don't think I've ever really spent more than 10, 20, 15 at most spies on a card. And that 15 and 10 were really absurd conditions of me playing guild with 99 spies, so I didn't really need it. But a general high cost or high price for me is like 7. 7 is already quite high. 5 is at the highest I would generally try to push it, early on at least, because I still have half or around half of what I have at the beginning of the game. Let's say I'm playing Atreides or someone that starts with the standard 10. Half of what I have is what I usually try to budget for bidding, so that I can still have more than enough to ship, enough to go for a fight, enough to actually spy style if I'm playing the advanced game, enough to actually use the cards I buy, because otherwise, why am I even buying them in the first place?
I think for
What
me,
good is
the
a
two
card if you can't get
exceptions.
yourself in a fight?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what good is a card if you can't get yourself in a fight?
Yeah, for me, the two exceptions would be Harkonnen and Guild. Those two factions where I don't mind spending all of my spice in the bidding round. I mean, the Guild is because I'm going to be getting some money here in shipping and movement. There's almost no chance that I won't pick up something. And if we're playing advanced, I can wait until everyone else is shipped just to get that income. And for Harkonnen, since I'm starting with 10 forces already on the board, to me it's worth it if I can, especially in the first turn, if I can end that with 6 cards in my hand. I feel like it's worth it because I can, from where I am with the ornithopters, I can get to almost half the board really. So I can get to a lot of locations. So spice, a couple of different strongholds, so I can get into fights. And if I've got 6 cards, then it really increased my likelihood of having some decent cards to pick a fight, to threaten. And I think people feel very threatened by Harkonnen with 6 card hand. So if I'm able to say, all right, look, you're in Broken Land, I can send a bunch of guys over there and really make things difficult, kill your leader, capture another one of your leaders. So I want 4 of that spice. And same deal for you over in Old Gap. I want 3 of that spice. And that can be effective. It just depends on who you're playing with. Certain players are like, I never negotiate with terrorists, so come fight me. Um, but other players are like, no, I just don't want to do it. So having the 6 cards, I think, gives me so much extra leverage. But then you're averaging 5 spice per card, and in some mixes of players, that's easier said than done. So if Chom is in the game, they've got a little bit more that they can spend, and they've got a larger hand size, which they want to fill. So they're sometimes spending a little bit more than everybody else on average. And there may be a couple other factions that feel the same way, and who knows what their motivations are. Anyone else have other thoughts?
I mean, Fremen's never afraid to spend spice. They just
Mhm.
can't usually in the first few rounds until they collect some. And because, they don't need to use spice for dialing and stuff, I find they're
Yeah,
generally a little more free with.
that's true. Yeah,
Uh,
they don't.
You
That's
can
all they need to
you win
spend it
big.
on. Most of the time is just
Mhm.
buying cards. So yeah, they'll up those bids
And
because it's worth
the
it to
funny
them to
thing
keep
about
cards out of other people's hand, for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. Like, the funny thing about Fremen is they can afford to spend a lot more than anyone else, and they already start with a really strong presence on the board. Like, they can be literally in half of the table, not even having started the first turn. So they start really strong, but they really rely on. They can afford taking some cards away from other people, but they rely on getting good ones. So it makes total sense for Fremen to say, well, I have 10 spies, I'm going to spend 10 spies this turn. I want that good card. Because from then the game really opens up.
Do you guys feel like bribing Atreides is usually worth the cost?
For the right
Depends.
price.
Yeah. I
If you're
for
paying more than one spice for a single card, you're paying too much.
generally, yeah.
Unless you're made of money.
And also I very much add an extra layer to that. And if Atreides is already getting a lot of spies, I don't really want to pay them anymore. I can afford to guess since Atreides changes the bidding so much, and if they give that information to other people, they will also like bid accordingly. So if just Atreides doesn't bid high, doesn't mean that it's a bad card. Maybe they just don't need it. If three people after Atreides also bid very low, there's a high chance that that card is not really great. So I try to not feed the Atreides too much, although that information can be really, really valuable for someone that can get one or two cards in the entire game, perhaps. Getting those cards right can really prove like key to actually winning.
Yeah, if a lot of people are bribing the Atreides, in fact, I feel sometimes even if there are two people have bribed Atreides for looks at a card, that means half of the table has seen that card. Um, I feel personally less inclined to want to bribe and more inclined to just go, all right, let's see if these guys are willing to bid on this card and outbid anybody else. And I know that they're all in on the joke and trying to get somebody else to bid up on something that's not particularly worth it. But it's a risk that if I have bribed for information, I'm usually not willing to take. I'll just
Mm-hmm.
pass. And so I think again, some people are better at the poker face than others. Um, but I will try to read the people and decide whether or not a card is worth it just on their behavior. And if more than two, then I feel like all right, they know the value of this card, and so we'll see what it gets up to. And if I unless I'm really screwed in the turn order and have to commit early to like, all right, do I bid three spice for this, which is more than I want to spend on a worthless card, maybe even more on a cheap hero or harvester or thumper. Um, then I might just pass. And if I don't have the spice to bid again when it comes around, then so be it. There are going to be other weapons and defenses that will eventually come up. So, um, but yeah, if spice is a limited resource for me, then I'm not going to spend any for a bribe, and I'm not going to get sucked into throwing it away on a too unknown of a quantity.
Mm-hmm.
All right, are there any other sort of general bidding wisdom you want to share, or should we get into some of these factions specifically?
I think factions that are going to want to pay Atreides for peaks are ones like Emperor Guild, BG Riches, where you have to pick your battles more carefully, so you don't want to fight frequently, and your hand size almost becomes a valuable resource because, of course, battles is typically the only time you can discard cards. As BG, if I buy a card, I want to make sure it's a good one because if I'm gonna fight a battle, I want to have the best cards I can have. BG player might
Yeah,
even win
for
the game only fighting like three total the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
I
Another
think.
thing is,
Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, GJ, you actually made a good point earlier of like how much you feel like is a number you try not to go over, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
much is a lot? Because I feel like with new, just I mean, like can it can be a little bit of a mystery how much you should hoard your spice for battles for shipping, when you should spend. So I feel like laying those ground rules out, like you said, especially first turn, I find that people are especially unsure of how to bid. So, like you were saying, I think it was like five is something that you
Yes.
tend to not go over unless you're
Mhm.
extremely wealthy, and that's probably a good rule of thumb. But if they're going for 3 and 4, and that's something you can afford without breaking the bank, then I feel like it's almost a no brainer at that point to bid 3 or 4.
Yeah,
I
for
just
sure.
say that because I've seen like wealthy factions like hold back on a bid of 4, and they have at least 12 bid in the bank. I'm like, I don't know if it's worth it to let it, Hark get 2 cards for 3 spice. So
Yeah, that's for sure. I just wanted to point out one. I think Jared correctly mentioned that the hand size. I tend to like if I see that someone like Emperor is already quite rich, or someone that can afford to buy cards, has already 2, 3 cards in their hand, I tend to try and let them get filled early so that maybe the price can go down a little more. Because if the player can afford to spend those 6, 7, 8 spies without many problems are actually out of the bidding round, the entire average price I will pay for a card drops drastically. If I'm BG, I cannot afford that 7 spies. That 7 spies is immense. So maybe I wait. I don't know. I let Chom fill up. I let Emperor. I let Guild. I let the Emperor's ally fill up, and then I can sneak in a card for like 3 spies maybe. It may not work, but it's definitely something that it's worth keeping an eye out of, just because it can really save you those precious little resources that you may need in the later phases at a cost of effectively nothing. Just they were going to get the card anyway. May as well at least trick them into either paying more or making sure you can pay less.
Yeah, and a common thing that we do if the Emperor is in the game is, depending on how early they do get full, the rest of us who can buy cards try to make a binding deal that we're just going to each let each player get 1 card for 1 spice. And that means that the Emperor is not going to be getting as much money, and everyone else is at least getting something, even if, all right, I got a worthless card, I didn't get anything good out of that, but it did only cost me 1 spice. So that's that trade-off. And I know the Emperor hates when that deal happens, but it is perfectly legal. And if you're not doing that in your games, well, congratulations. Now you have some way to game the system against the Emperor, who is certainly game it against you at every opportunity. So you should take advantage of it when you can.
Yeah, it's a huge blow to their income. Like if you think even that a card on average goes for 4 or 5 spice, and now it's going for 1 spice, that's you're cutting it into a quarter or even a fifth of what they would have gotten. It's huge, especially early game.
In contrast to this, I want to point out one extra thing that sometimes bidding without the intention of buying a card can be actually good. Like, if you know you're not going to get it, but you see that someone really wants it, maybe they know what it is for whatever reason, being a tradies or they got information somehow, and you see they really want it, try to outbid them 1 or 2 times. Try to make them spend that 1 or 2 extra spies. Because one worst case, you get the card, which they really wanted, so it's probably really good, unless they outplayed you, but then congrats to them. And the other case is they paid those 1 or 2 extra spices that for some is not really that relevant, but for others, it's shown charity. For others, can mean the difference between being able to ship 1 or 2 extra forces or not. And if it's a really important fight, those 2 forces can win or lose it. Those
Yeah,
very little things can be really, really effective.
might as well bid. Might as well bid 1 or 2 spice on something, especially when a lot of the other players can have room for a lot of cards
Mhm.
and have the spice to get it. You don't want them to pay to underpay for anything good. Um, well, let's start with the emperor himself. I know that when when I'm the emperor, I try to strike a balance between getting a collection on a pretty high bid from somebody else. One, because I'm getting a lot of spice, and two, that means they don't have that much spice, even if they are getting a pretty decent card. But also saying, look, if I've got a lot of money, I should have a full hand, and um, I should have at least 3 cards in my 4-card hand as the emperor. And that'll just depend on how much spice that will leave me, how many of my forces are on the board. But in general, I like to pick up at least 2 cards in an auction just because I can afford it. And so that's my approach with the emperor. Um, when I've got an ally, I'm going to go ahead and say, sure, you may be taking advantage of me as the emperor, and you're only allied with me to get a full hand of cards. But fine, let's do it. You fill up your hand, get all those cards, and then let's see if we can't win the game. Because if you do dump me at the next Nexus, I'll find somebody else who wants cards, and I'll give them a go. So I don't really take it that personally. I figure this is the big advantage of being my ally. So I will go ahead and make it easy. Fill up your hand, get all the cards you can. That at least gives me some kind of a fighting chance to have an ally who can help me win the game. What are you guys? What are your thoughts on playing the Emperor? What are some good strategies in the bidding round, or stuff that's just absurd? And your advice is don't ever do this. Don't spend 10 spice.
Well,
Best policy for buying your ally cards is definitely to ask to see them.
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
nobody's gonna turn that down. Uh, Me, I like to play the Broke Emperor playstyle, which is I think I'm the only person that does it, but it's very fun. It's essentially the goal that at the end of every single turn, you should be at 2 spice, which is enough to be spending all your spice when you can, but high enough so that you're not claiming chome and revealing to the table that you're poor. And then you just go for those really early wins. Sometimes even solo. Like a couple weeks ago, I won on the second turn as Emperor solo in an async game and totally caught everyone off guard. But I had the best hand, and I had literally after the win attempt 0 spice left. I literally spent everything I got.
I mentioned, well, we mentioned how uh, making the deal between everyone to only spend 1 spice if the Emperor is full is a really effective way to nerf the Emperor. You as the Emperor don't want to do that. You as the Emperor want to avoid that situation. So what I tend to do is let other people buy the first half of the cards so that I can at least ensure myself some income this turn. And the other 1 or 2 cards left is where I can actually focus on buying them, provided, of course, I don't know what the first are, I don't have a specific goal in mind or whatever. But in general terms, I want to ensure that I get something, that I use my ability of actually gaining that wealth. Because if I have it, I can use it. If I don't, then I'm pretty much useless.
And if
When
you do
I'm out,
screw up and get full, you can always offer to bribe someone 3 spice not to take the deal, and you'll usually make that back.
exactly. And also, when I'm playing the Emperor and my ally just wants to use me for cards, I tend to be a little selfish and say, yes, I will pay you for cards, but I set a maximum limit of spice I can give them. I can give you 7 spice this turn. Do whatever you want with it. You choose. Up to you how you want to use it. Or if you want to spend 10 spice, I will cover 7 on that, but those last 3 you will have to spend. And I really like it because it's like an insurance policy. The ally still gets a lot of benefit from you, but you still don't risk just being completely backstabbed. Because if an Nexus happens next turn, they are full, they don't need you anymore, and they will go with the voice or whatever else. So it's a very fine balance between being useful, but not only being a tool, and actually being able to be competitive on your own.
I heard an interesting deal made in a game last year. The player who was the emperor bribed somebody an absurd amount of spice. It was like 14 spice or something like that. But the deal was that they could only spend that spice on stuff that the emperor agreed that they could spend it on. And so they had to keep it on a little pile off to the side, and so they would say like, "Hey, Emperor, can I spend this spice to ship 2 more forces?" And he would be like, "I will allow it." And so it, it was a really interesting thing. I'd never seen that sort of thing before, but I highly approve of it, and it's an interesting thing. You could, I mean, it's not a deal that you could make with your ally, but you could make it with somebody else, and then I think if you ended up in an alliance with that player, that deal still holds true. It doesn't. I don't think it goes away. It was a pre-existing arrangement, and you wouldn't be able to then say, "I'm giving you more spice to put into it." Any other spice that you gave them, that spice was theirs to do with as they wish, because you can't make those kinds of deals. But it was interesting. It was a lot of spice, and so they were throughout the game. They were like, I want to spend. I want to spend raise my bid to 6 with some of this spice, and the Emperor was like, no, nah, not this time, and so it's just really interesting on the gameplay. So I like that sort of thing, and I hadn't seen it done since then, but. And ultimately, neither of those players won the game. So I don't know what they got out of it, but I thought, and in concept, I thought it was a pretty sound approach. Yeah. Anything else on His Royal Highness? Any other strategies or tips or pitfalls to avoid?
I think they pretty much like Emperor is simple. They have 2 abilities. That's it. Only one during bidding. That's it. So there's really not much more to it. I feel like it's just a matter of getting that feel correctly,
Yeah.
playing him enough times in a lot of different situations and settings that that bid is actually worth it. And it just takes practice. That's the sad thing about this game. But the good thing is that you will have to play a lot of Dune to get there, which is never a bad thing.
Let's.
On the higher end of complexity, you could kind of play like the arbiter of the bidding phase and be like, oh, Atreides trying to buy a third card. I'm going to bid them up, and I'm only going to pass if someone else is winning the card.
Yeah.
You could sort of play like that and use your money, if you're not spending it all like me, to control who is buying cards. And just say, no matter what, if you bid on this, I will upbid you. No card this round for you.
Well, and the Emperor can, effectively use bribes that way too. They can say, "Look, I can't bid anymore, but Atreides just bid 6 on this card, and so I think it's a card that we don't want them to get. So I will bribe, so and so." So it's almost like a rebate. You're not going to get that spice till really the next turn, but if it's a matter of just if all that happens is you're forcing Atreides to eventually bid 9 spice for that card, that is a good use of your wealth as the Emperor too, to just kind of force them to really overspend on something, because you've got that ability to throw your spice around and get people to do your bidding. That's really diving into the social aspect of Dune, which is my favorite part of Dune. That you can do these sorts of things. You can try to manipulate the other players and get them to do your bidding. So you can goad them, be like, don't let them get that bid more. But usually what they'll be like is like, I don't want to spend that much on it. And then so the Emperor can soften that with like, look, you bid 1 more, I'll bribe you 2 spice or 3 spice. So you're actually going to make money on this, even though, even if you end up winning that bid, you're going to be short this turn, but then you're going to be up again next turn. So might be worth it. And I like that the Emperor can do that. I like seeing players take advantage of that as an ability. Let's shift over to the Rich S. Go over to look at Count Ilbin. So Rich S has a lot of stuff that they're doing in the bidding round, and a lot of their strategy revolves around picking which of their cards to sell at any given time, but also what form of auction. So they have 2 different types of auctions that are not the normal method, which they have to use for their special Rich S treachery cards. And of course, then there's black market, which they can use any of the 3 methods Black market is a little bit more of a crapshoot because the other players don't necessarily expect it to be a very good card unless Rich S is just that desperate for spice that they would be selling something that everybody wants. But I think that there's some interesting gameplay here, and a lot of it is going to be affected by what other factions are in the game, how much spice they have at any given moment, and then again, like with anything, the players themselves and what they're up for. I tend to not sell as Rich S the really spicy cards in the first couple of turns. I'm not going to put Null Entropy or Stoneburner or probably even Karama up for sale on turns 1 or 2. Probably not even 3 or 4 if I'm being honest, but I am interested in getting some spice on that first turn so that I can buy a card and then not feel like I'm back to the poorhouse right away. But let me hear from you guys. What have you seen as an effective approach with some consistency despite certain mixes of factions or whatnot? What type of auction and what type of card do you like to pair with it when you're playing Rich S?
I found that Smuda Drug is a very good turn one sell. I think it perfectly hits the balance of juicy enough to get money, but not enough to where it's going to significantly impact who wins the game. That's my ideal turn one sell. And usually once around, you do it in such a way that the richest player is bidding last. That's pretty surefire way to get a lot of spice.
All right, so the way that works is Rich S puts the card out. It's public, so you know what it is, and Samuda Drug lets you pick a treachery card immediately after another player discards it. So it is a pretty good, and if multiple, go, you choose which one it is, so somebody can't be like, oh, I'm going to put this la 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 on top of the artillery strike, and good luck. You can be like, oh, they were discarded at the same time. So, yeah, this is a really, you're waiting for something good like, oh, there's a poison weapon out and Atreides keeps killing people with it and somebody discards a snooper finally or, one of the other really good cards. So they put that out. It's public for everyone to see. And then this type of auction that Jaded is talking about is each faction is going to get one opportunity to bid, and that's it. It's not going to go around again. And you're picking which direction. So it's going to end with Rich S. So they might say, well, the Emperor's got a lot of spice, so I want them to bid last. So you say, all right, Atreides is going to bid first. And if Atreides wants this card, they're going to have to make a pretty good bid for it. It's not like they say, all right, I bid one. They're not going to win this bid with one spice. So they have to really decide if they want it or if they want whoever does get it to really pay for it. They got to really look at how much they're willing to spend for it. So they might be like, oh, I'll bid 4. So then it goes to the Ixians, and if they can't bid or don't want to bid higher than that, they have to pass, and then they're out. And then let's say the Harkonnen is like, yes, I will bid 5 because I still get an extra card off the top of the deck if I buy this. And then Chom is like, nah, too rich for me. And so the Emperor is like, well, I can afford it. Do I want to let Harkonnen get 2 cards for 5? So they say, yeah, I bid 6. And so then it's to the Rich S. So Rich S can take that last bid or whatever it is and get the spice for it. Or they have the one opportunity to outbid everybody. And then in this case, they would pay the Emperor. And if there's no Emperor, they'd pay the bank. And then they would get the card. But for 6 spice, yeah, they probably would sell that. And they would get 6 spice, which is pretty good. It's pretty good for that. Now, the alternative is the blind auction, and that is where everyone is bidding simultaneously, but they're in the real life. You're putting the spice in your hand. You hold your hand out. Everybody reveals simultaneously. We use, since everyone has a battle wheel, and you can just say, okay, this is what my bid is going to be. I'll bid 3. You bring those out, and then we reveal them. And if there's a high bidder, that player gets it, and Rich S can bid as well. And if there's ties are broken in storm order. So if Rich S bid 3 and the Emperor bid 3, Richess would get it because they are up first in storm order. And again, they would pay the emperor or the bank if there is no emperor. And so the advantage of using the blind one is that sometimes a player is not reading the signs and portents and has no sense of what other people are willing to spend. And so I would say more than occasionally, I would say it's almost usually somebody has bid too much. And you go, great, I'm putting the Distrans out there, which is not, it's not a terrible card, but it's not great. You give another player a treachery card from your hand. This, it lets you unload a worthless card or something else, and you're like, here, take this. But it can also be very effective if you're like, ooh, you need this defense or this weapon, and now I have it. I can give it to you, which is normally it's very hard for that to ever happen. Chome can do it kind of with their ally, but here you can do this with anybody. So this could be a game-winning, defending move. So it's a decent card. So you put that out there, and you make the case too as Richess. You're like, this could be really good, blah blah blah, and then everyone bids, and the Atreides bid 2, and Ixians bid 1, the Emperor bid 3, and Chome bid 6, and so you're like, all right, thank you for that. But the once around, it really gives you a chance to you're picking the direction means that you can usually end with one of the more wealthy factions who's better able to outbid everybody, and that's if you want the money. The other big strategy thing that I take into account when I'm Richess is, first in terms of what I'm going to sell and when, is when I do have some spice. Certainly not a lot, which is almost never the issue with Richess. But other factions are either full or a little tapped out themselves. And then I say, now is a chance for me to sell something that I want to get. And maybe the once around, and then maybe you start with the wealthier faction or the one that could spend more, because they're so afraid of overspending on it that they often will bid a little bit lower. So they're like, I'll go 4, maybe 5, and it gets back to you, and it may be, it is worth spending 6 to get Null Entropy or the Stone Burner, or something else that is particularly useful at that given time. There might be a faction that's down to 1 leader, and so you're like, you know what, residual poison, and if I go fight them, I can kill their last leader, and then they cannot play treachery cards. So it's an interesting approach, but yeah, the conditions have to be right for Richess to be able to do that. So I think part of my strategy is, early on as Richess, I'm trying to get forces on the board cheaply, but also maybe trying to use those no-field tokens to go after remote spice blows that the other players are overlooking or don't want to fight over, or whatever the case may be, and just trying to stockpile some spice so that I can afford to buy one of my own cards. If I can get a hold of a Kurama card, that's going to be great for Richess. They do have one that they can sell, so if they can buy their Kurama card, their once per game Kurama ability is they can then just secretly buy any one of their cards, and that is a great special moment for Richess when they can make that happen. What about you guys? Any other things? What am I missing here on your strategies for playing Richess in the bidding round? Trying to make money, or whatever else you're trying to do as Richess. What have you seen? What have you done?
Richess, go ahead.
There's one thing that I want to point out before anything else, is that Richess is probably the most socially demanding faction in the entire game. Like, they have the ability to completely screw over a game if they sell the wrong card, or to make the game feel nothing different if they sell something that is not needed at that moment. And you have no clue on which is the correct choice other than feeling the table, seeing how people react to each decision, how they are approaching the game, what this board state is. Everyone else just plays their own thing. They have a name and that's it. This is a completely different thing, since you're putting something for sale for everyone to see, for everyone to be able to actually get it. If you put an entropy box or Stoneburner or even the Karam at a wrong moment, you can literally just throw the game in one single moment. So it requires a lot. It requires a lot of careful decision making, which is not easy at all, which is why people say they are really weak. And they're not the strongest. They're definitely not the strongest, but they benefit a lot from that extra level of depth in the understanding of how the table is going, how the game is going, what card actually would benefit people, what do they need, what single slot can they afford to get. Because remember, it's one card that people will not be able to buy normally. So if you give them these trans, it's just generally one extra dud in their hand, and they don't really want it, unless some very specific case. So it's a lot of balancing between, can I afford the risk of selling a really strong card, or do I really want the spice, or do I really want it for me? Can I really ensure that it will go to the correct person? And it's a really hard thing to balance, but if you do it correctly, you will be swimming in gold without any issues.
I sometimes ask the table, what do you guys want me to sell, or what do you not want me to sell right now? And and I'll be like, yeah. Or someone says, yeah, I really want you to put this out there. I want the ornithopter. And I'll be like, all right, fine, let's sell it. And I will sometimes poll the table and what sort of auction do they want to see. I don't always go with what they want, but it's a nice way to gauge that information to sort of get a sense of what people want, especially if it's early in the game. You don't really know what people need, or there haven't been enough battles for people to have a good sense of, do we need the portable snooper out there now, or do we need some other, Juice of Sappho or some other effect that that a couple of factions would find useful at any given moment. So yeah, dive into that social aspect. We've had over 40 years of the base 6 factions to see how they play, how they work. We benefit from that knowledge. Even people who are relatively new to Dune, there's been so much that has been said and written and discussed about those factions. The new 6 factions, we don't have quite as much time, so it is going to take, I think, players a number of games playing with them or playing against them to get a strong sense of what our consistent approaches and what our good strategies. And hopefully this video will also help people who are new to these factions to get that sense. So somebody else have some Rich S comments they wanted to throw in there?
Yeah, it's definitely good to know your players. I used to play with a guy who used to always love playing Harkonnen, and he would always overpay for residual poison because he liked it so much.
Yeah.
Every time I would put that out, guaranteed 6 spice at least. It was great. So like, if you know there's a specific card somebody at your table likes, definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah.
You should also save cards to black market if they're like a cheap hero or a truth trans or a worthless card, because if you sell a black market card, that takes up a slot of a card that would normally be sold, which means that your richest cards are inherently now more valuable because there's if you sell a bad card black market, now there's only 5, for example, good cards that could potentially come up.
Yeah.
So it'll just artificially jack up the price of your richest cards.
Someone else was telling me that they like to sell something really good as a black market card early on in the game to create this atmosphere of goodwill and trust. And then they start selling crap to everybody as a black market so that they can get more spice for it and keep people guessing. And so, yeah, I think
Yes, I
that's.
saw this.
You can get away with that a couple of times, I think, before people are
I
wise
saw
to
it
it.
happen in one of my games, and Rich as player was experienced, and I think taking advantage of newer players. I'm like, he's lying. There's no way. He's trying to sell a card every turn, and it's be something good.
All
And
right.
again, it plays into the social aspect of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
faction. It's such a the ability in itself is really worthy, but it's really not complicated. but it has so many different paths it can take. Just be really careful and just read the table, see what people need, see what they want, and the spice will come that way. The auction type matters a lot as well. You often may, like, if you don't really have a lot of choices, it's later in the game, you only have 3 or 4 cards you can pick from. You really don't want to sell that Malentropy box, but you are kind of forced to. You could start from the player that actually you don't want the card to have the card. Because if you go once around, the first player will generally not spend that much. It's risky. Like, what if I spend too much? What if everyone else would have spent a lot less? So they try to be a little more conservative. And it gives chance to everyone else to actually outbid them if it's a really worthy card. So always keep in mind who do you want to actually get what card, especially if you wanted it for yourself.
Yeah. All right, let's give a little bit of love here to Atreides. They're the original bidding uh, powerhouse here, at least in terms of information. So them getting to see each card that comes up for bid, and that would include a black market card. So the richest card that is sold each turn is face up, but if they sell something black market before technically the bidding round even begins, Trades does get to look at that. And Richess can lie about what it is. They can be like, yeah, it's a snooper, but it's really Triptychomon. Um, but that information, and to be clear, it's not like you say, oh, there's going to be 6 cards, and Atreides looks at all 6 of them. They are looking at them one at a time um, as it's coming up for bid. And that information can be very useful. You know, you're knowing who's going to end up with it, but it also helps you to make sure that you're not overspending on stuff that you don't want or need. Although it does give you the opportunity to try to bluff the other players by maybe making a bold bid on something that is no good because you're expecting somebody else to want to spend more to keep it out of your hands. What else? Let me hear from you guys because this is, again, it's a base game faction, so we've got a lot of experience with it. What sorts of things work best for you when you are Atreides, and what works best for you when you are not, but somebody else is Atreides?
I, I personally will never forget about Quinn. I just got I, back in the days when I started playing this game, I was still very inexperienced, and I saw them play at Radies, and it just completely warped the game in such a weird way. Like being able to trick people into buying cards you don't want them to have, or you want them to overpay for something, or you just want to say, well, this card is actually really good, or it's actually not. Or even the wild thing, just give up your advantage. Reveal the card to everyone. Be absolutely game breaking and say, well, I don't need information to stay to myself. Everyone can see it now. It's a subtle thing, but it's an incredible, powerful one that you can just do for free. You have information, you just can use it however you want. You are not limited to just knowing what card is up for bid. You are totally free, and you should game the table in such a way that they fear and want to actually buy that information from you. You want them to respect the fact that the one card they are buying now, you are going to note it down. You have your star charts, as we call them, and yours are supposedly and hopefully perfect. Every information on there is correct. You want the table to know it. You want everyone to be aware of the fact that you know what they have in hand and what they can and cannot do.
Yeah.
This is a deeper strategy, but you do arguably have the responsibility to tell the table that, oh, the Harkonnen are looking like they're going for a win this turn, and they bought Hajar, so watch out. You know, there's a chance here that they could go for it, even though it doesn't look like it. Or, oh, they have a Karama, watch out, BG. You know, you're not gonna have voice if you try to stop them in this fight. It's important to tell the table if like big important cards got sold to the people who are in the best position to win, because otherwise it's just a case of, oh shoot, man, if I knew he had that, I could have done something different, and he wouldn't have won.
Yeah.
So it's important to know when to sell information and when to give it freely.
Yeah, for sure.
I sometimes like to say things like, uh, "Don't let the emperor buy this card."
Oh, oh, there I go. Hello. Uh,
Yeah,
it,
even something as simple as that.
Yeah, but sometimes I'm just saying that because I'll be like, "Don't let the emperor buy this card," because somebody is not going to be happy about it. And what I'm really saying is that the emperor will not be happy if he spends a lot of money for this particular crappy card. But it does create a little bit of buzz, and the emperor's like, "Oh, maybe I do want to spend 6 spice or 7 spice on this." And so, again, it's a little bit like the rich ass black market bluff. Sometimes you give away
Yeah.
some really useful information early on so that you establish rapport with the players, and then you just start messing with them. Where you're like, yeah, yeah, and like, like Jack, who shouldn't end up with this card? I'm like, well, BG and Harkonnen, don't let them get this because I can think of a couple of players who will be very unhappy if that happens. And technically, I wasn't lying. So I don't know if that holds up in a court of law or the court of public opinion, but it's the it's a good approach, and it keeps people on their toes, which I think is thematic to Dune. Sometimes you want to believe, but you should never ever fully trust anybody. Um, and yeah, with that phraseology, you can say, "Oh, bindingly, I will bindingly say there's a couple of players who will be very unhappy if either BG or Harkonnen get this card." Um, and then we can parse words later on. But you have to leverage your advantages the best way that you can. So if you've got information that's useful for you, especially if you're going to be militant about keeping track of who has what, so you've got your giant whiteboard like Malister. I got for my birthday I got a small whiteboard so that I can do the same thing. But yeah, I'm not carrying that giant one around. There's just nowhere for it. But I think the other thing though is that information is useful to other players. So sometimes it's good to be sold, but sometimes there's the greater good of you need to let so and so know if you're going to go get into a fight with player X here. They do have both a projectile and a poison weapon, so um, you know make your decisions smartly with that information. And or like Jade had said, they've got Hajer, so we should start talking right now about stronghold blocking. Because they're going third in turn order. So if we can't block everything, we want to force them to go where they don't want to go necessarily. So that information is really vital and useful in a variety of ways, and it's good for you to keep track of that. And it's not always about trying to bluff people into overpaying for cards. That can work against you too. I've been to tradies enough times and have spent 4 or 5 spice on a cheap hero and been like, oh, hoisted on my own petard once again. So be careful. Know your players and know
yeah.
who's going to fall for it and who is not going to fall for it, and make your case. You've got to really upsell it. You got to say, look, I'm going to bid more for this because I want to make sure there's a certain player that I don't want to get that. And once again, that player is me, but I'm creating the illusion. Yeah, so everybody else needs to just be aware of that. So anything else? Anything else on the tradies? We've
Oh,
got
you need to make sure that if you sell info on cards up for bid, you need to include an NDA for that bidding
Yes.
phase.
yeah.
When people on the server discovered you could just take the info that Atreides told you and sell it instead, it was crazy. Every time, every bidding phase, they would have a whole 30-second preamble of, okay, this is the rate for peeking at cards this turn, standard NDA.
Yeah,
It was just insane.
I got to the point of seeing Atreides sell the info to one player who sold it to another two players who ultimately sold it to the third one. Since they were part of different alliances, they couldn't bindingly do anything. But they made such a intricate web of deals and whatnot, and Atreides just got spies of one single player, and the whole table knew everything,
Uh,
which was absolutely hilarious to see. But not something I would ever recommend doing.
I know somebody who has a printed out contract of this is how it works, and so
Oh
if
my
you
God.
agree to this, you and feel free to read it, but you have agreed to these terms, and it does. It's like there's no sharing of that information without my consent, and blah blah blah. So yeah, it's some people are very serious about it, and good for them. I encourage that. I love the props in the physical gameplay. So yeah, take it to the limit. Um, all right, I want to shift over to, if I can get here, to the Ixians, because here we have some similarities to Atreides. There's information, um, but they've got their own special twist on it. And the big one here is that for each bidding phase, what's going to happen is you're going to look at the number of cards that are going to be sold. And when Rich S is in the game, it's more of a mathematical formula, but they're going to draw from the top of the deck one more than that number. So if they're like, all right, everybody can buy, there's going to be 6 cards, they'll draw the top 7, and they get to look at all 7 of those cards, so they know what's going to be up for auction. But they're going to get shuffled, so they won't know the order of the cards. But they're going to take one of those cards, any one of their choice, and they're going to pull it out of the auction, so it will not be sold. That card's going to go either on the top of the treachery deck or at the bottom. And if it goes on the top, that's important for a couple of reasons. One is if the Harkonnen are in the game, if they buy a card, that's the card that they're going to get. So the Ixians can screw the Harkonnens by giving them whichever card is the least good. Sometimes they're like, oh, it's all good cards, so this is really bad for everybody except the Harkonnen. But if the Harkonnen are their ally, and in fact, if anybody is their ally, they can top load the deck with the best card, because either the Harkonnen will just get it for free as their second card if they buy anything, or what can happen is when the Ixian ally buys a card, they can look at it and go, discard it, and then just take that top card, which the Ixians have assured them is a good card. And sometimes they even let the ally share in, let's look at these and let's pick one that we think should be out of the auction. So if the Ixians, if they have a poison weapon, they can keep trying to suppress snoopers so that there's no effective defense against it. If I draw like 2 or 3 worthless cards in an auction, I keep them all in and get rid of the best card, and I just save my money that turn by not bidding on anything, knowing that everyone's picking up mostly garbage. So that all these things have big impacts. But let's go back to our panel of experts, and let's talk about effective things that you've done or seen with Ixians, as them or against them, and any words of caution or wisdom for new players hoping to capitalize on their advantage.
I will start by not a good thing I've seen next players do. Like the most natural alliance ability, like alliance synergy you have is with Harkonnen. You put a really good card on top, Harkonnen buys a card and gets the card on top. They get 2 for 1, which is incredibly powerful. But it's also really risky, because you as a X, you are not getting anything out of it. You're just making another player really strong. And I have been in the position of playing that X player, trusting my ally, Krell, a little too much. And it ended up backfiring really hard, because he got Poison Blade and Shield Snooper in 2 different turns, and then decided to leave the alliance and go for someone else. He ended up losing both cards in one single fight because he got blown up by a lasgun, but that's beside the point.
That's the curse.
Just be really careful. Like, be really careful of your ability, because it's really strong, really powerful, but your ally is still the last person you can trust in the entire table. You can make deals with everyone but your ally, or rather, you cannot make them binding at least. But the amount of control you have, it means that you as X have an incredibly strong turn 1, 2, and 3. Because you can pick the card you start with, you can bottom deck everything else, like everything that counters that card. You start with a projectile weapon, all the shields are suddenly going on the bottom of the deck. Who knew? Now you can guarantee an opponent's leader kill. You can maybe pick up the opposing defense so that your leader is also safe, and you effectively have a perfect hand without needing 4 cards. It's an amount of control that I don't think many other factions can reach so effortlessly. And let's not forget about technology, like the ability of saying, well, I got a bad card because you don't know the order in which they're going to be sold in. You can just swap one out, whatever you want. You just do it even if it's not terrible, even if you don't know or if there's anything better than what you have. Even just to confuse Atreides, which is the main thing I hear Atreides players hate X about. Your ability to just mess up their charts, mess up perfect information they have, is something you should capitalize on because it's really, really powerful, often underrated or understated, but it can really change how confident a player is fighting against you.
Yeah. I think the information is also useful, irrespective of whether Atreides are in the game. It is sometimes worth it for the Ixians to offer to sell information about what is going to be part of the auction, and then Ixians and whoever else buys in on it. It's kind of a level playing field. They're like, all right, 3 of the 5 cards are going to be pretty good. So, or like, half of these cards are good. So it's worth, 1 or 2 spice. And if multiple people are going to bribe you for it, it's a good way to maybe preempt the Atreides. And if Atreides gets in on that, and I've seen this done too, Atreides is like, all right, I'll give you a spice as well to see the cards. And then I say, oh yeah, there's 3 really good cards, 3 really bad cards. It's I think Atreides makes a good case for, hey, bribe me, and I will let you get a peek, or I'll give you heads up when it's one of the bad cards, or something like that. And so the two factions can kind of work against each other, or kind of almost work together to milk everyone else for their excess spice. And so it's not always an antagonistic relationship between them. They can sometimes play off of each other pretty effectively, and so it's win-win for both factions. But yeah, that especially if Atreides is not in the game, that is your one good source of information before you go getting into some battles. So the Ixian player should definitely take advantage of that, but be smart about it. There may be times where you really don't want anybody to know what's going to be in that auction. Like, for instance, if it is filled with mostly worthless cards or no weapons and defenses and that sort of thing, you do want people overpaying. But you might make a deal with one faction to get a favor out of them. Maybe the Tleilaxu will give you a revival deal, or the guild might give you a rebate on shipment if you let them in on sub. So it's not always necessarily about the spice. There's other things you can do to deal, and you can wait until you've seen the cards before you decide what kind of deal you want to make, and that can be a very useful tool as the Ixian player.
If the Atreides player is someone who likes to sell a lot of card info and they like to make a lot of money from that, it's often very good, or at least really funny, to just undercut them all the time, because it, usually if you offer a better price, people are more likely to look at all 6, because you can kind of generally see what's out there. A trade is going to have to really cut their prices down to get anyone to buy single card info, and that'll mean that if they're that type of player, they'll probably have trouble winning the game without that source of income they're used to.
And even if no one takes your deal, the fact that you just lower the price Atreides is asking is a massive win. Like, you did nothing, but Atreides is now 50% poorer than they otherwise would be, which
Yeah.
is nothing to be actually like overlooked.
And there are 2 states where you can try to make this deal as the Ixian. So I've done it sometimes where I'm looking at 7 cards and I'm like, all right, have a look at these 7 cards. And sometimes I make a deal where somebody can have influence or just outright pick the card that's going to be out. Or I've done it where I'm like, you can see the 7 cards, but I'm not telling you which one I'm going to end up suppressing. And so, just depending on what it is that's in there, how much spice you think you can get out of people, and other circumstances. But don't forget that that is an option as well. So you can do it with the whole array of possibilities, or you can wait until you have suppressed a card before you shuffle them all up to say here's what's left. So if you want to take a look, and you can sometimes be like, all right, I'll for certain for an even bigger discount, I'll let you know the ratio of good to bad, or how many cards in the six are worthless cards or specials, or how many weapons are up for sale. So you maybe can't get as much out of them for the specifics, but you're like, for one spice, I'll give you, the forecast of what's going to be in here, so you can decide if it's worth bidding on multiple cards this turn, or if any. And that's going to be a read the table, look at how things have been going, what are people willing to spend on. You can certainly offer one deal, and if nobody takes it, adjust it to something else. Not that we want to prolong your game of Dune, but it is what it is. So take advantage of it in any way you can. Does anyone have anything else on the Ixians? Let's get a couple more factions here. All right, let's slide over here. Talk just a little bit about Harkonnen. I talked a little bit earlier. My personal strategy is it's hard for me to resist that 2 for the price of 1. And especially with me starting with 10 forces on the board, I'm not too worried about running out of money on the first couple of turns if it means I'm going to have a fat hand of cards. But what other strategies do you guys like to employ as or against a Harkonnen when they're in the game?
It's great to note that as Harkonnen, these extra cards you buy are completely unknown to the Atreides.
Yes.
So if you were to say buy 2 cards in the first turn, you will have 6 cards, and the Atreides will only know 2 of them. And I'll tell you one thing, there is nothing scarier as Atreides than that. Sometimes I'll even pay people to fight Harkonnen just to get them to reveal some of their cards.
Yeah, and then I totally agree. And as Harkonnen, you're almost trying to save things. You know what I mean? Until they're really important, or you make a big move or something.
Mm-hmm. Like,
Yeah.
you have to play big, even if your hand is terrible. You have 8 cards.
Yeah,
People
for sure.
don't know, so play big.
Yeah.
And Harun is really straightforward in bidding, to be honest. Like, you can afford to pay a little more because you're getting that much extra benefit.
Exactly.
If a card is going for 4, you can afford to pay 6 because you're getting 2 out of them. You're still paying less than average on every single card you get. Plus the extra information, the extra thing that no one else knows what a card is, bearing X potentially. It's such a big thing. It's super simple, but it's really, really powerful. And if you see a full-handed Harkonnen with a stronghold and is not completely broke, you're scared because they can really turn the game on its head in one single turn, and they probably will.
Yeah, if the Harkonnen aren't just going for a win, I think they have a really strong intimidation factor once they're at 6, 7, or 8 cards, especially in advance where you've got the added threat of capturing a leader. So they're going to win a battle, and if they win a battle against you, the odds are pretty good that they've killed your leader, either with a weapon or through traitor. And then they're going to capture another leader, which they'll either hold on to, and if it's me, I'm holding on to it for the rest of the game. Or they can just kill it and get 2 spice, and then it goes into the tank's face down, which means you're probably not going to see that leader again if the Tleilaxu aren't in the game. And so, yeah, the two leaders at one time is a big deal, and so you can use that intimidation to extort spice from people, to get them to throw fights. And you can say, I want to come into Arakeen here, and if you just throw the fight to me, then I won't, do all the extra shenanigans and humiliate you in front of everybody by killing Jessica and capturing Thufir. And so, why don't you get your Kwisatz out of the deal, and then now I've got the added income of the two spice from Arakeen, and I'm in two strongholds now, and maybe I don't really have any good cards, but nobody knows that, so I'm able to keep what good cards I have secret for a little bit longer. I got a chance to maybe unload some worthless cards, or over the next couple of turns, I'm playing some of the specials so that they're out of my hand, and now I can fill them up with more cards yet again. So I've played at Harkonnen where, the first several turns, I just got people to give me stuff or throw battles or avoid going to spice blows because I had so many cards and they didn't know what any of them were. And and I would like zero in on a specific faction a lot. So they're like, "Oh, you must have 3 of my leaders as a trader," and I had none of them. And so, but that's that's the mind game of Dune. That's what you want people to think. And so, that is, I think, one of their great strengths is just their scary faction, and nobody wants to be the first one to have to face their full wrath and find out that they did have the poison blade, or they do have this other, they've got the laser gun and a snooper, and so they know Fade is safe because he's one of their 4 traders. So there's that's the situation that if you can make that work as Harkonnen, you can really start to position yourself strongly over several turns until you are ready to make your move and go for the win. Anybody else?
Just wanted to add that as for bidding goes, as this is the topic of this specific video, is like you can afford a little more.
Yeah.
You can let yourself go because you can make spies by just not doing anything other than threatening people, and you get that extra little bonus. And unique thing you have is your incredibly broken special Karama ability you have in the advanced game, which can be devastating. You can only play it during the bidding round, but at any point, so you can literally wait until every single card is gone, it's bid on. Just before you move to revival, you play the card, and now you can swap cards with another player's hand. You can disrupt the Atreides information. Someone bought all 5 cards up for bid this turn. Well, just get them. See what they did. I've even seen the wild thing of using a special Karama on your ally just to trade cards back and forth between the two. It's such an incredibly powerful thing that can really completely screw over someone and empower you so much more. And it's generally one of the strongest, if not the strongest, special Karama in the entire game, just because it has an immense potential to make yourself go from scary to an absolute beast.
Yeah. And that's another reason why it can be worth it to just say, all right, I'm going to end up spending all my spice, but I am getting 2 cards here, and every time you get 2 cards, you increase the possibility, however remote, that one of those cards is going to be a Karama, because that's magic for the Baron, especially when he's looking around and so-and-so's got a full hand, or they've won some battles, so some good cards, or the Atreides bid a lot of spice for something good, and they seemed pretty pleased with themselves, and you're like, well, it's time to find out, and if that was really a good card, especially if you do happen to have a couple of trash cards in your hand that you can unload as the Harkonnen. So you're like, well, I didn't pick up anything great, but they now do have a Jubba Cloak and a Kulan, and now I don't. So that could be just the right thing to happen right before you make your move to win. So you've effectively neutered a player, and you've picked up hopefully a couple of very powerful cards that are difficult to counter. All right, I'm going to zap over and we're going to talk about our last faction. Doesn't have a huge impact. It's not going to be a lot different from Harkonnen, but the one advantage that I think CHOAM has here is the fact that worthless cards to them are not worthless. Each one has a unique effect. Some are going to be more useful more often than others, but even the ones that are pretty edge case, if you find yourself in that edge case, can be very effective. Just last month, somebody used CHOAM to spank me with no free revivals using their La 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 card. at a time where I was kind of counting on getting some of those forces out for free, and I've done it myself. So they've got a little bit more flexibility to say, yeah, I'm willing to bid on a lot of cards. They've got a nice regular income, so they're going to be picking up a lot of times 10, even 12 spice each turn. And so that, knowing that they're getting that, they can usually buy a couple of cards each auction. They're willing to bid maybe 5 or 6 per card, which most of the other factions are unable or unwilling to do. So that's why I think they're worth talking about in our bidding discussion. Any other thoughts you guys have on Chome?
I just wanted to say that there's nothing more hilarious than playing recruits and then using La 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 on like the Fremen or something.
Yeah. Oh, that is the
Like,
best.
that is just brutal.
So recruits doubles your free revival, and the Fremen free revival is 3. So that would be 6 forces they could get out, but then they would be getting none out, not for free anyway. So they'd have to spend. Now maybe they have spice, but maybe they've just spent that on treachery cards. So yeah, that is a fun effect.
But I mean, the main thing Chom has during bidding is the 1 extra card hand limit,
Yeah.
which may seem small, but it actually isn't. It allows you to buy stuff a little more carelessly. And considering you are, I don't want to say rich, but you at least can afford those 2 or 3 extra spices that other
You
factions
have
don't
consistent
really.
income.
Yeah, exactly. They will gain spice back at some point.
Yeah. It also
You don't have
means
to rely on
that
spice lows.
it also means that they're increasing the number of cards that are going to be up for sale on average by a small amount. It's not a very big increase, but if they're at 4 cards, they're not full. And so at the start of the bidding round, if several factions are at 4 and Chome is one of them, Chome's not full, so they're going to get that extra card out there still. So they usually have a little bit more that are out there available to buy, which means they can keep bidding, keep adding to their hand. If they play a worthless card or they sell excess cards, so they've got 2 snoopers, they can sell a snooper, and if they've got some worthless cards that they don't want to use for effect, they can just sell those. So they've got a nice flow through with their hand. They're not stuck. They don't necessarily have to get into battles to unload some of those cards. If they've got 3 cheap heroes, they can sell 2 of them. So that's a big deal for Chome, I think. On occasion, it's not something that happens often or even in every game, but gives them the flexibility to keep buying cards and never having a full hand for very long until they maybe have cultivated a really good hand of powerful cards. So they've got some options, different defenses, different weapons, maybe a special weapon as well. That's what they're looking to get to. And so they're more likely to be able to get to that just because they've got the income. They can spend a little bit more, and they can unload cards without necessarily having to get into battles to do so. So all of these things, I think, makes Chome a very effective faction overall and an interesting participant in the bidding round.
Let's not forget their alliance ability.
Yeah.
Like, you can trade cards. You can afford to buy duplicates knowing your ally may get one.
Exactly.
It's incredibly powerful, and once again, screws over Atreides.
I had a situation where I was Chome's ally, and I traded them a card that they were just so that they would have duplicates and could sell one of them, and so which they did right before bidding, so that they were able to then get. I think I was the Ixians in that game, and so I was able to top load a card and give them a really effective card, and that was key to the success of that alliance there. So just being able to trade and optimize who was going to get what and what we could do with those cards was a big deal. So so Chome has, again, it's not always going to be applicable, and sometimes it'll have a bigger impact than it will other times, but the potential impact is huge with a lot of these effects. All right. Well, any final words? We've got a pretty good episode. We've got a lot of good information out there for players to think about in bidding. Any last thoughts?
Mostly that there are other effects that affect cards indirectly. Like there are ambassador tokens that allow you to discard cards, draw cards. There are terror tokens that let you do it. There's always the fear of the voice being really scary, so be careful about what you reveal to the table. There's Fremen that can just buy cards and who cares about anything else. But the important thing is to know that the bidding phase is just the very first part of the turn. You still have to play everything else after. So get stuff that you will use, but don't overspend.
Yeah.
Be very careful with your resources.
Pay attention to how many cards everybody has. At the bidding phase is when that is public, and we've got this handy system here in TTS. So when we get to bidding, our tokens flip over, and these track your cards. But if you're playing in real life, make sure that you have every right to know as soon as the phase starts how many cards does everyone have, because again, if the let's say the Trades is at 4 and they buy the first card, they're not bidding on anything else for the rest of the turn. So that can be very important. Same thing with Emperor. If he's full up, there's no reason that we should be overpaying for the rest of these cards unless Atreides is in the game and wants to implement some kind of extra control on there. And you should know how many at the end of the phase, because if a lot of people have full hands, they may be extra dangerous now. So do pay attention to that, because once you move on to revival, then it's just, what do you remember? So like, all right, we're shipping and we're moving, and you're like, I want to go into Carthage, but how many cards does Harkonnen have? Are they full, or do they only have 4 cards? What did they get rid of? How much do you remember? I mean, Trades is like, well, for 2 spice, I'll tell you everything you want to know. And you're like, oh, maybe I'll just go to Siege Tavern instead. So these are all important considerations, and then when you get into the battles, you'll find out if you do truly remember what was going on, and if Atreides steered you right. All right, well, thanks everybody for watching this episode of Battle Language, where we talked about bidding strategies. If you have other tips that you want to share with us, do so in the comments. And if there's something else that you would love to see the Battle Language table talk about in an episode, do share that as well. And provided that this recording worked, then yeah, we'll definitely do that again, because I think it's a good way to tackle a lot of interesting subjects and get a lot of shared information out there and different takes on how to play and master Dune. So that's it for this one, everyone. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.